MDR Monthly Developer Review. Sup dogs, and welcome to MDR, the series where I recap everything that I've done in my latest project, Captive YAMI, as well as any other types of shenanigans I've been up to for the month of May. Well, no need to stall, let's just go ahead and get into it. So first off, if you don't know Captive, you are my idol. It is a horror game that I'm currently creating using RPG Maker, and more specifically, Cutie Virus's MZ3D plugin. You play as Aylin, pretty much your online streamer slash YouTuber who gets kidnapped by one of her biggest fans. The game takes place in both 2D and 3D perspective, and let's just say that this dude is a little bit of a character. Every night he invites you up for dinner, but little does he know, this is where you can make your best progress for your escape. You can either look around, observe your surroundings, and plot your escape, or you can try to roll deception and see if you can deceive him into believing that you like him. But then again, there's also that third choice where you just succumb to everything and, you know, allow him to be yours. So as you can imagine, there's a couple of different ways to play this game, and as such, a couple of different endings. Each route provides for the other route, so in one route you may learn a little bit more that can help you in the other route. So it may be worth trying different strategies. And by the way, the teaser trailer is live, so go ahead and check that out, as well as the game page over on Steam. Now as for the month of May, I'm trying to remember what I did. The first thing I actually did was create a plugin, which is kind of nuts because it's the first plugin I ever made, and as you can imagine, oh boy, did that take me a long while just to do a very simple thing. All I wanted to do was hide my mouse and change the mouse image cursor. I like to actually give credit to Aunt Mouse Lab. She actually helped me out through her YouTube videos, and still took me the entire day to figure it out, but hey, I at least had somewhere to start. Overall, I gotta say, it was awful. Just because you have your plugin manager commands, and then you have your plugin commands inside events, so you gotta like think about those two things and script out for those two things. And then there's the actual doing what you wanted to do, so it's like kind of weird. But besides that, for the most part, all I really did was link the maps together. So usually when I'm like testing out and debugging, I usually have my player start on the map, and then there's a small event that will turn on all of the switches and variables and set all of that so that I can just jump straight into what I need to test. And of course, I am also using labels to jump through my scripts so I can just skip through all the cutscene and get straight into what I need to go into. So all I was really doing was just cleaning that up, removing all those old jump to labels, removing those test events, and making sure that the transfer between one map to the next actually looked good. And I also cleaned up a few graphics and added a few graphics and a couple of sound effects. Most in particular, I had to rework a lot of the times when Aylin starts in the basement, just because there's a very interesting thing that happens with MZ3D, the plugin, and it's probably because I just don't know it as well. But based on the player's facing direction, when you tell it to transform into that 2D perspective, whatever your facing direction is considered the way that it flips. So if the player is facing down, then the map will actually look upside down. And if the player is like facing up, then it'll actually display the right way up. It was actually pretty weird. It took me a while to figure that out, but figured it out, and I had to make sure that I had the player facing the correct direction before I started transforming the map. Other than that, there's another thing I couldn't figure out, and it was with the player's shadow. For whatever reason, I just could not figure out how to turn off the shadow. When Aylin was laying on the bed, you'll see her laying on the bed, but then her shadow would be like beneath the bed, and it would be really weird. So instead of figuring out how to fix this, I did more so a loop around this. And all I made was player transparent, so that the shadow is also transparent, and I just had a dummy event in place of where the player would be going through all those motions. And of course, I just turn off the shadows altogether. Now, the tricky thing by doing this is that the camera has to center and follow the player or follow a certain event. So, if the event is moving off the bed and moving around, then you need the camera to follow it. But when you switch the camera from following the dummy event to the player, it flickers and it'll look really weird. So what I actually had to do is once Aelin left the bed, the player was in position, turns on the transparency so that you can see the shadow, and then flip the camera. It's crazy, right? To have to do all of that just to make it look more smoother. But I don't know, I'm reading through Qt Virus's documentation and I can't find anywhere to turn off the player shadow. And I saw this like tutorial series on YouTube for MZ3D, and I saw how to turn off shadows for events, but it didn't work for players. Maybe I just had the command wrong. I don't know. I just can't turn off the player shadow. So if you happen to know, let me know. Not like it will do anything for me now, but perhaps someone else who's trying to do the same thing, they could probably use it. Another big one I did is, of course, the grammar. I actually rewrote well, I didn't really like rewrite the script. I just rephrased a couple of things to make it feel more natural. And of course, that always takes a good chunk of time. And then fixing a couple of bugs here and there. Actually, you know what's interesting? When you playtest something so much to the point that you just know how it's supposed to work in the back of your head, and then once you're finished with it, you don't go back to it for the longest time, let's say a couple of months. Now, when you're about to finish the project, you go back and play everything to make sure that everything's all smooth and that there's no bugs. Then you reach that point for that mechanic that you made, and then you're like, what the heck was I thinking? Why did I think this was good? So that actually happened to one of the scenes, and I actually had to tweak it a bit and rework it. The last thing that I did was I actually created this pixel art scene where the kidnapper puts his hand on Aelin's shoulder. And in my opinion, I thought that was going to be crazy hard and difficult to do because I am jumping outside of my comfort zone with pixel art where everything's just 24 by 24 pixels, and then it expands up to 48 by 48. Instead, I'm actually creating like a little portrait. I'm actually drawing the hand, adding details, a little bit of shadows, as well as Aelin's shoulder and a bit of her hair, I guess. And I don't know. It actually turned out a lot easier than I thought it would. The game is set for 1920 by 1080, but the way I did it, I think I did 192 by 108, and then I just scaled it up to 1920 by 1080. Something like that. Not exactly that, but basically that. No. It's kind of like a proud moment, I suppose. Like, I'm just remembering back to the Caster's Trap days where I'm like struggling just to make a lantern. And here I am, making a little baby portrait. That's progress. 2 more things I made. BGMs. They are a bit more easier to create in this game just because it is a little bit more ambient than it is making melodies. And there's no like real intense music I have to create. I find that creating lower BPM songs is a lot easier than creating higher BPM songs. So yeah, another proud moment for me. Alright, and that's Captive YAMI. I was hoping to have the game released in July, but if I'm gonna be realistic, if there's one thing I've learned, is that you're certain you're gonna be able to finish your game by a certain month, add 2 months to it. And that's really when it might actually get released. So I wanted July. Realistically, it'll probably be August or September. But I really feel like it's August right now. plus 2 months. On to the next topic. So for the rest of the video, I'm just going to be talking about a couple of shenanigans that I've been up to. I've been on a couple of trips, and there's also been a lot of anime I've been watching. I've also been reading a couple of horror mangas, and I've actually been reading them since the beginning of the year. I just keep forgetting to add them into the MDR just because anime tends to take up that portion. So I'm going to try making the anime section a little bit smaller to add in the mangas. So starting with trips, recapping a bit of last MDR, I went to Texas. It was towards the end of April and bled into May a little bit. And it was a work trip, so I won't get too much into detail there. But during the work trip, we went to what's called a dude ranch. And it was actually my first time hearing the term, and I was like, what? And pretty much for several of us, most particularly people around my age, we had no idea what a dude ranch was at all. And when we got there, we were like, oh my god, we are in a horror movie. It legit feels like that small community where they're going to essentially murder you in your sleep. Like you go there, have a good time, decide to stay for a night, and then overall, it was a good experience. I did get the chance to go out on my own and just look around Austin, Texas. I did not go to the university, but I did end up checking out downtown. I got to eat out a food truck, and my god, those were the most delicious tacos I ever had. They were tiny, about the palm of my size. Kind of sad, but they were also extremely cheap. I think it was like $2, maybe a little bit less than that per taco, and they were just, oh my god, they were so delicious. It could just be the food truck grease talking, but wow, best tacos I ever had. Also, as you can imagine, the barbecue, amazing. Would I move to Austin, Texas? Probably not. They do have some Targets, so I do feel like there's more things for me to do and be interested in Austin, Texas than there was in Tennessee. But I think if I went to a different part of Texas, maybe I enjoy it a little bit more. Things are also a little bit more spaced out in Texas. I think it's mostly just me being from Boston, where everything is more compact and condensed, just because Boston's a very old town and everything kind of just popped up right next to each other. And I'm just really used to being able to just walk less than 5 minutes to something that I would need. That being in Austin, Texas, or a bigger city where things are more spread out, kind of just feels less convenient. I guess I'm spoiled, basically. Although I will say, financially speaking, the housing is a lot cheaper down there. So, not anytime soon, nor in my plans. Next trip, Montreal. Now this one was actually for fun, and it was with a couple of friends. My brother and 3 friends went to Montreal. It was actually for One Piece the card game. There was a major regionals event, and I have all the stories up on my Instagram, so if you're interested, go ahead and check that out. But for the most part, a lot of it was not what we were expecting. We've been to a One Piece regionals event before, down in Florida, and the way that worked is that the event went for 3 days. Day 1 was registrations with a good amount of side events. Day 2 was the main event, and then day 3 was a lot of side events again. Now for Montreal, on the other hand, instead of 3 days, it was just 1 day. We went in expecting the same thing as Florida, so we went in Thursday, left on Monday, and the event only took place on Saturday. So it was kind of depressing for all that to happen, and it became even more depressing when, well, your boy didn't do all that well. As a matter of fact, 3 out of 5 of us did horrible. One of us did really good, and the other one, my brother, he did okay. So my good buddy Joe, he he made it up there. He got top 95 or 96. Basically top 128. The way that pricing is cut off, it's 256 for your first prize, then 128, then 64, 32, 16, 8. I think there's 8, but it might just be top 4, then 3, 2, 1, of course. And he got 95th or 96, and his pricing was not bad, pretty good. Has some value to it, but not the best value. He won 6 rounds, lost 3, and to get top 64, he needed to win 7 and only lose 2. And then beyond that, as you can imagine, there's a bit of, or a lot of tiebreakers involved to place 32 or 16 and higher with only 1 loss. So it gets pretty crazy with placing in these tournaments. And overall, getting top 128 is a pretty solid achievement. So great job, Joe. Proud of ya. You made it up for all of us. Sort of. There were a good amount of side events, and us 3 losers from the main event, we got really close to winning one of the side events. It was 4 rounds, and we all lost to the same guy. My buddy placed 2nd, I placed 3rd, my other buddy placed 4th in the side event of about 20, a little less than 20 people, and the first place person in the side event gets a pretty hefty prize. They get what you would receive from placing top 64. So we were really close to getting it, but we were short. Overall though, I'd say One Piece wise was an awful experience for me. For those who do play, I did play Perona, and I just had the worst luck when it came to drawing cards. In the card game, there's something called bricking. Bricking is basically drawing cards that are similar or of the same copy in terms of like their abilities or what they're used for at the least optimal time. And that happened to me all 3 games during the main event, and to the person that I lost in the side event. I swear, my luck was just not having it that day. But other than that, Montreal was actually pretty neat. One thing that I did not consider when going into Montreal was that it was French is their first language there, but everyone pretty much still speaks English, so it was actually very comfortable traveling and doing everything. It was just that there was one time where I went to a manga cafe, and it took me until I reached over and grabbed a book off the shelf to realize that if they probably prefer speaking in French, then they probably also prefer reading in French. So I had to, of course, grab a second book just to confirm it. But yeah, there was also a small corner just for English mangas, and then there was also a little tiny shelf for Japanese mangas. So it was actually a really cool cafe. I didn't take any pictures because it was kind of small space, and I didn't want to be that awkward tourist just taking pictures at people's random stores and of people in it just trying to mind their own business and read. But other than that, we had a lot of fantastic food there. We had, of course, the classic poutine, Japanese barbecue that we can't find here in the States, a super sick all-you-can-eat sushi buffet thing that you also can't find here in the States, and of course a hot pot buffet that you can't find here in the States. So, or at least not in New England. Maybe other parts of the States, but not in New England, that's for sure. And that's pretty much my trips. On to the next section. So welcome to this new section. It's horror mangas, and I've actually been reading them a little bit here and there every night. Pretty much my bedtime story since the beginning of the year. And I don't want to take too much time talking about each of the books, so I'm just gonna pretty much list them and briefly explain what they are and whether or not I recommend them. So first of all, The Drifting Classroom. This book is by Kazuo Umezu, and basically it's Lord of the Flies but in a school setting. An elementary school gets transported, let's just say, to a different dimension, just so I don't spoil it for those who are interested. and they have to govern themselves. And there are, of course, the teachers and faculties that did also come over. And let's just say things spiral into chaos. It gets very psychological and kind of dark. If you're okay with kids dying, because it is an elementary school, it is, of course, in the novel, but it is pretty similar to Lord of the Flies. And overall, I think it's an enjoyable manga. But I did spend an entire year in high school pretty much going over Lord of the Flies, and I've had enough of Lord of the Flies. So I'm actually just stopping with the first book. I decided not to continue it just because the scars from that is too real. But just to note, The Drifting Classroom is a classic when it comes to horror mangas. Very well recommended if you have not read anything similar to Lord of the Flies before. Then I read Remina by Junji Ito, and if you don't know who Junji Ito is, then if you're in the United States, you probably heard of Stephen King, and you're probably very familiar with how he's a horror novelist. Well, in Japan, it's Junji Ito. Very, very popular for his horror mangas, and probably even outside of Japan at this point. AKA, he's the GOAT of horror mangas. If you have not read any of his novels, then you should very much do so. If there's a place to start, I would recommend Uzumaki. He has this very classic theme to his horror mangas where it's the chapter 1 starts off pretty normal, and then at the end of chapter 1 you feel like, ooh, things are about to hit the fan. And then in chapter 2 they hit the fan, and it's kind of crazy to see how fast things escalate, especially since just in chapter 2 things starts going, and then it just spirals into an abyss of both visual and psychological horror. He just knows and understands horror and how to combine it together so that one does not feel too or like it outweighs the other. He just has this good mash to it, and I would really recommend reading one of his novels if you're into horror mangas. Remina, the one that I read recently, has to do with a world-eating planet. So, as you can imagine, some crazy things goes on in that one. Relatively short. Next up, I read Another. Another does have an anime, and it released back in, I think, around 2015-ish. If you are familiar with the meme of the girl who falls down the stairs and gets stabbed through the throat by an umbrella, that's where it came from. It came from Another. And Another sits comfortably in that nostalgic area for me, just because it's one of the first horror animes that I've watched. So now that I started reading again, I was like, you know what, I want to go back to this one. It's very supernatural, and there's a lot of mystery behind it. Highly recommend it if you like that over gore and grotesque images, which is a weird way of saying things. Wandering Witch Elena. This one is not so much to horror, but instead that it's dark. We're basically watching or reading different tales almost every chapter of Elena as she travels the world. It's filled with magic, and there's a lot of dark themes in them. It's like if you watched Harry Potter and you were intrigued by the darker side to the world behind Harry Potter, Wandering Witch Elena kind of emphasizes that. It's a very unique world, and it's more so for experiencing the world and the people in it as opposed to Elena's growth as a character. Here's one that I'm reading recently. It's called Shibito no Koe o Kiku ga Yoi. That's my best attempt after all my Duolingo that I do. And it translates to You Will Hear the Voice of the Dead. This one is actually one that I'm currently working on. I think I'm 20 chapters in. It's considered in the category of dark comedy. It's a middle schooler who sees her best friend as a ghost, and her ghostly friend kind of helps him out a little bit because in every chapter there's a lot of horror things going on, like curses, spirits possessing other people, or like a serial killer. and it's actually a really fun read. The dark humor or dark comedy that comes from this is actually not as dark as it sounds. I actually would compare it a little bit to Courage the Cowardly Dog, if you enjoyed that show growing up, where you try to find the comedy side and all of this scary horror things that's going on. It's less so on the psychological and just drowning yourself in the worst case scenario. It's taking things a little bit more lighter and putting the concept of horror in a more, that's funny that happened, sort of light. Anyway, if you enjoyed Courage the Cowardly Dog, but in this case, a school club, and a cult club to be more specific, then give this one a read. I think it's pretty fun. I have heard that it ends on a cliffhanger, which is very disappointing, but so far, each chapter that I read, 70 or so chapters in total, it's been a good ride. And that's pretty much everything I read. So, on to the next topic. Ooh, actually, I forgot about one thing. So while down in Austin, Texas, I found a Kinokuniya, which is essentially a Japanese Barnes & Noble's. Half of the store does have English mangas, but the other half does have Japanese mangas, and it's pretty much for weebs like me to collect Japanese novels, or if I do actually read Japanese. But for the most part, there's a lot of merch, like Genshin merch even, for, again, weebs and nerds like me. But I decided to pick something out, kind of like my own souvenir from Austin, Texas. And back when I was in college, I think my freshman year of college, and I want to say that Higurashi was actually my first anime that I saw that was horror. So of course it sits in a very comfortable place of nostalgia for me, and I decided to slowly start expanding my collections so that it isn't just Dragon Ball and One Piece that you see on this shelf, and of course Genshin, but also some of the other hobbies and interests I have. I do like horror, but I don't really collect anything that's horror, mainly because I think the figures are kind of a weird thing to collect. But novels, kind of neat, so yeah. Unfortunately, they didn't have book 1, instead book 2, but hey, it's a nice cover art, so yeah. Alright, now on to the next topic. First anime I watched was Blue Lock. Blue Lock is a soccer anime. As you can imagine, your first thought is, oh, it probably follows the same ideas of most sports anime, where there's a lot of camaraderie and, you know, all those big feels. But no, Blue Lock is actually a little bit different. Rather than being 100% for camaraderie, it's more personal, because all of the characters in Blue Lock are strikers. So they're pretty much your star players that always make the goals. And everyone in the show is a striker. So everyone has very greedy personalities and huge wants to be the best. And Blue Lock is essentially, it's not exactly a prison, but it does kind of feel like a prison, where all these players are forced to team up together to compete to be the best individually. And that sounds really crazy and a really hard concept to get behind if you haven't seen the anime. The more unique thing about this show is that as you watch through it, the teams aren't set in stone. So the main character may find himself in a different team or with a different cast of players on his side. And that's where it gets really unique and very different from a lot of the other sport animes that we've seen. And it's also in this setting that, uniquely in Blue Lock, in one episode you're hating a character, but now that the main protagonist is on the same team as him, you suddenly start to like that character. It's kind of crazy. Next anime I saw was Rising of the Shield Hero, and this one is also a little bit different for an isekai. Isekai being someone who gets transported, usually to a fantasy world. So for this one, the main character gets horribly betrayed. after the first episode. Like, everything feels all happy and giddy, and things just feels great because he was summoned as a hero to help protect and save this world, and everyone's gonna respect him and help him get to his goal of defeating the big bads. But after the first episode, he gets betrayed by the king's daughter, and after that, it then spirals. It gets worse and worse for him, where he's actually hated by pretty much everyone just because he is the shield hero as opposed to the lance hero and the sword hero and the bow hero. So as you can imagine, this anime is really dark and touches upon a lot of dark themes, and overall it was just very addicting to watch this because it was a different isekai from a lot that are out there. But then halfway through the first season, it just changes completely because there's a little bit of redemption for our shield hero where all of the mishaps gets clarified. But there are some characters in there that are just super annoying, and it does feel a little bit redundant at times that they'll just constantly hate on him just because of who he is, aka the shield hero. But then it gets weird. He acquires basically this chocobo, and it just feels strange at that point. Like, I actually had to pause from watching the show, but then after I picked it up again, it kind of felt like, oh, okay, this is the anime now. And I just continued watching the rest of it, and it wasn't too bad, but it definitely didn't feel the same show as the one that I've started. Although there are a total of 4 seasons that's out now for Shield Hero, so it's very popular, and it's, I think, something worth giving a shot if you don't mind the dark elements to it. I finished season 1, and I'll probably pick up season 2 to see how the show turns out. It's more like I've seen a lot of isekais, and the second half of Shield Hero started falling into the same category as most isekais, so I kind of feel like I get where the story is going, and the episodes do feel a little bit more predictable to me. But if you're fresh to isekais, then it's worth giving a shot. After Shield Hero, which is what I'm watching now, Tokyo Revengers, and if you remember a show called Erased, it actually follows it kind of closely in some sense, because the main character is jumping back in time to save a girl he likes romantically, whereas in Erase, the dude jumps back in time to save a girl that we thought he liked romantically, but it was just to save this girl. But the difference here is that in Tokyo Revengers, it's more about gangs, and then in Erased, it's about saving her from a serial killer. So with Tokyo Revengers, it's less horror and more drama, action, and adventure. There's a lot of bromance, as you can imagine, being a show about gangs. And the flash forward part is that in the present time, the girl that he loves always ends up dying, so he's jumping back in time to prevent leading up to that path. And every time he changes something in the past, there is a butterfly effect, what that does drastically change the future. And I think the show is just pretty fun. There's a lot of characters for you to get to know and to like, but of course it does kind of follow the cliche of gangs, so a lot of dark themes and a lot of bromance. There is one odd thing about this show that you kind of forget as you watch it, but in the back of your head you always remember, and it's the fact that everyone's a middle schooler. In Japan, middle school is a little bit different. Here in the United States, we have pretty much kindergarten to 4th grade, 5th to 8th being middle school, and then 9th to 12th being high school. So in Japan, it's grade 7, 8, and 9 that's in middle school. So it's a little bit different, but they're still middle schoolers, and everyone's like a giant and extremely buff and jacked, and it's kind of weird when you just take a step back to think about how these gangs are like or all the characters are like in these gangs, and especially when they're starting to ride motorcycles and stuff like that. It's like, okay. But that aside, it's a good show, and it's worth checking out. Alright you guys, I think that pretty much concludes it for the Anime Club of MDR. What's next? Well, in terms of Captive YAMI, actually next month I'm going to start working on a video for Captive YAMI, which is the first of 3 major videos for this project. Well, if I count the showcase of MZ3D, and that's video 1, then there's 3 more videos to follow in this series. And that second video is going to start being worked on in June. That'll be exciting to see when it releases, hopefully by the end of June, but of course, we will see. Thank you for watching MDR, and I'll hopefully see you in the next month. Have a fantastic June, and see ya then. Later.